Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to the channel after what seems like a very long summer break. We did have the Euros, which I really enjoyed, to be fair, and I hope everyone is doing fantastically well. So, obviously, dawning on the new season. So, the very first video of the season, we're going to have a bit of a play about with some drafting. Basically, on my team, I just created my account when the new season came out, just auto-filled. So, we're going to have a look at my must-haves and kind of how to structure the team by kind of demonstrating a few players you could be fitting in and what kind of price structure you should be using throughout your team. So we're going to dive into it. Again, as I say on every video, thank you for the support. All the socials are on the screen now, and let's dive straight into it. I've got to say that I'm excited for this season to start. We're filming this on, what day are we on today? We're on Tuesday. So we've got about a week and a half till the season, and I'm very excited, I'm not going to lie about that. Hope everyone's excited as well. So we're going to jump into the video. So as I mentioned, I auto-filled my team from the very start, and I've basically taken the whole team out, except for the three players that I expect to be in probably 90% of teams. Well, you should really have these three players in there. I don't see many better alternatives to Salah and Bruno. People will argue Bruno. Well, I think they'll argue about both, to be fair. Bruno, you could get a cheaper option like a Greenwood, which, fair play, you might even double up on United. But Bruno, the fact he's on penalties, United can always get a penalty and makes it a big draw. And we've seen his fantasy stats since he came to the Premier League have been outstanding. Salah, for the whole time he's been at Liverpool, really, has been a standout FPL option. And the bit that sticks in my mind about Salah is a lot of people didn't put them in the Gameweek 1 teams last season, scored a hat-trick in the first game of the season. Everyone was trying to get him in. Luckily, I was one who had them in the team, but I don't want to get burnt twice, especially because they've got Norwich in the first fixture. And then Trent, as long as he continues his form as he had at the end of last season, and although he had an injury that ruled him out of the Euros, that's meant he's had quite a full pre-season, so I expect him to be firing from the get-go, and Liverpool's fixtures to start with are quite favourable. You could easily favour Robertson if you want to save 0.5 million, but 0.5 million, not a great deal, in my opinion, because Trent just gives you that slight bit extra, especially if it's on like free kicks as well. You know we can bang one of them in. There's also the cheap alternatives to Salah with Jota, who's probably going to get a few games because Firmino, I think, will struggle to play 90 minutes from the start of the season because he's had a long summer campaign, but that's to be seen. So Jota could be a good punter at the start of the season. But if we first look at goalkeepers then, so my goalkeeper strategy for the season, I think last season I got a bit torn because I had two goalkeepers that were decent. I think most of the season I had Martinez and Sanchez, and I was stuck between who to actually play. So my strategy for this season is to just have two goalkeepers from the same team, and how I'm going for it is to have the cheapest options. So I want a 4.5 million goalkeeper and a 4 million goalkeeper. So the best two options, in my opinion, for this would be your Brighton, who have Sanchez and Steele. Well, that was the original until they signed this new goalkeeper, which has gave me a bit of doubt about the Brighton goalkeepers, if I should be having them. And then also, my current favourite is Watford, who had a decent defensive record in the Championship. And even if you don't keep a clean sheet, you'd expect a newly promoted team from the Championship, to have a lot of shots against. So even if they don't get a clean sheet, you've got a high chance that they'll get save points. So there was actually two promoted teams I was floating between. I was floating between Watford and then possibly Brentford. But when I compared the stats in the Championship last season, Watford kind of excelled in the defensive numbers. Brentford excelled in attacking wise, but a lot of their games ended like high scoring games, or even if they won, it'd be like a 2-1. But Watford had a lot more, especially at home, they had a very good, strong defensive record. So at the minute, I'm leaning towards a combination of those two. I'm not expecting either of these to be the highest scorers in the game, but I'm just hoping the rest of my team would utilise that better. I think a lot of people will be going, well, should I say, sticking with Martinez from last season, which is a fair shout. I think Villa were very good at the first half of the season defensively, and they slipped the second half of the season. But Martinez just kept up with the save points, especially there. So I would say that is you want to be going for the cheaper option, or you just go all out for a bigger option. I think if I was going to be spending 5.5, I'd just go to a 6 to guarantee it with like an Edison. I think Edison and Allison just give you kind of guaranteed clean sheet, but then, well, you haven't got much risk of rotation, but you're just going to have a 4 million next to it, and you're using 1.5 more on your goalkeeper, which I won't really recommend. So that's probably how I'm going to line up to start the season, unless I get a bit more convinced by those Brighton goalkeepers who's going to start. Well, I know Sanchez is going to start, but if he gets an injury, I'm not sure on the backup option. So that's where I am at the minute with the goalkeepers. So we move on to defenders. I think in your defence and your midfield, you have to have a cheap option in both of them. When I first had an initial look, I was looking at a lot of these 4.5 million because there's quite a few decent 4.5 million options. Especially like White now that he's moved to Arsenal. That's not a bad shout. Holding did decent at the end of last season, but I'm not sure about him. Ayling from Leeds, I think in my initial draft I had him in there. Lamptey, I think everybody had at the start, but he's now got injury status down here. Fofana is also a good shout. But then I kind of dived a bit further into these 4 million players. So you're taking a risk with these 4 million players because I don't think any of these you'd expect to start every game. You might get 10, you might get 20 games out of them, you might just get sub appearances out of them. The main function is to save you money. So I've had a quick flick through these and a bit of a research behind them. And well, looking at the pre-season, and there's a few that kind of sit up to me. So Johnson from West Ham, he's been playing quite a few, well, at least playing half a game in most of the pre-season games. But him playing depends a lot on how West Ham set up. If West Ham set up with a back five, he's got a great chance of playing because Cresswell plays as that left centre back instead of left back, and then Koufal as the wing back on the other side. So if they play foul at the back, is a great option. But I don't think maybe against the bigger teams they might play foul at the back, but I'm not convinced they're always going to play that 5 at the back system. So there's a bit of a doubt about his playing time, as I mentioned about all these options. These are ones to very much look out for here. The 2 Williams at Liverpool and United. There's rumours around that these are both could get a loan. I think Williams might have been mentioned, the Man United Williams to Norwich, and I think I saw a rumour today about the Liverpool Williams, but I can't particularly remember what team that was too. So keep an eye on them between now and the Gameweek 1 deadline, because if they get a decent loan move where they've got a potential to be playing, not even starting, just getting some game time. Like I said, this 4 million player, the main reason is to save you money. If they get a few minutes, that's a bonus. So just try and maximise the time you expect to get from any of these players. And then there's 2 more interesting options that I've seen going through them. One is very recent. In fact, this Southampton Livramento, actually pronounced that pretty decent. So he has just come on loan. No, he's actually been bought by Southampton from Chelsea, if I've got that right. And he plays as a fullback. From what I've seen, he normally plays as a right back. So that gives a bit of competition for Walker Peters, and he can also play a left back, which Southampton just got rid of Bertrand. So he could get in at either flank, especially if there's an injury there. Then I'd expect him to get some game time because he's highly rated from the Chelsea youth setup. So he's a very interesting one. I think it is literally in the last few days he signed for Southampton, so I'd be keeping a keen eye on their pre-season game to see if he's getting any minutes. And then I also saw this Norwich centre-back, Oman. I'm not even going to try to pronounce that. You guys can let me know in the comments how you pronounce him. But I've been following the pre-season quite closely, and he seems to be getting quite a lot of game time. Again, it's quite hard to gauge in pre-season because you'll get 45 minutes of one team and then just change the whole team, but he seems to be getting quite a few minutes. So not a bad option, but probably the bottom of the pile for me. If I was taking an option now, I'd be Johnson or Livramento, dependent on where one of the Williams moves. So if we go now, I'd be sticking a 4 million player in there straight away. So I mentioned we want to be going for cheap midfielder as well. So if I flick to the midfielders, there's only really two options that spring to mind. So they've got to be 4.5 to get the cheapest and most effective pricing structure. So your first one is Brownhill. I think a lot of FPL managers went a bit crazy when I think he scored 2 goals in the pre-season game the other day. He's on quite a few set pieces, which is also a draw to him. So he'd be the first option. And then our other option is actually he's on loan from Chelsea, Billy Gilmore, I'd probably expect from how he's been playing when he has played for Chelsea or even for Scotland to get quite a lot of game time for Norwich. And in the pre-season games, I've seen him playing quite a lot. So he's not a bad option because I think he will get quite a lot of minutes. I think with these two, unlike the defenders, these two players could pretty much guarantee you 2 points every week if you need to play them. If you've got a bad set of fixtures for some other midfielders or some injuries later down the line, these are both realistically should be playing options for the teams. So it gives you a bit of flexibility down the line, not having to transfer these out for a play-in, even if you wanted to upgrade them. But it saves you having to do a sideways move to like a Basuma just to get you some points. So they're clear, the two, in my opinion, Brownhill and Gilmore as the two to go for. I don't see a lot more value. I know a few people had Basuma last season just because he's pretty much guaranteed to get you 2 points because he just sits there in the midfield. There's not many better options out there. I'll be sticking with those two if I was you. So I think we've been talking about cheap options, so we're going to go back to the defence. So in defence, again, I think to get the right kind of price structure that you want, you still want a pretty cheap defender in here, so a 4.5 million defender. So as I touched on earlier, I think there's 3 standout ones in my opinion at the minute. Ben White, Ayling. I say Ayling with a bit of hesitation because his fixtures at the start aren't great. So later down the line, he could be a better option. But White and Fofana, I really like as the 4.5 million option. Obviously, not a fullback, so they don't give you great attacking potential. But they could, you never know, get one from a set piece. And I think I edge towards Fofana just because you know he's kind of settled in that Leicester lineup and he's pretty, obviously not a guaranteed starter, but he's got a great chance of starting most games. How his form was last season, especially, and Leicester did pretty well in the league. So having this pricing structure kind of gives you a bit more to play with when you come to some of your other defenders. So with this structure, I feel it allows you to easily get 1, even 2 medium priced defenders. So I'm looking around this 5.5 mark, and as long as his injuries aren't an issue, because I know he was carrying some knocks from the Euros. There's rumours that he had broken ribs, Luke Shaw. So I'll be very tempted to have Luke Shaw in there. Got a decent set of fixtures to start with. I think it's probably one of them ones you want straight in there. And also right next to him, he's a fan favourite of mine, Digne, I'm not going to lie. After my triple captain on Digne, got me a nice solid haul last season. So I'd say I've got a bias to Digne, but there's a lot of options in this category. Even John Stones, who we saw excel in quite a few weeks last season, but there's a bit of rotation risk there. Even Wan-Bissaka, even if we hear anything about an injury and we need to look at a different option, Wan-Bissaka's not a bad option. Cresswell, again, I think a lot of people are skipping out on Cresswell. 19% owned, but I think I'm not seeing a lot of teams with him in there. He's a good option. Obviously, if I've got Johnson in there, I don't think I'd go for Cresswell, but there's a lot of 4 million options. But outside of that, I think that highlights those kind of mid-range. Obviously, you've got a few more expensive ones. If you want a Liverpool double up, that's not the worst idea I've ever heard. Especially their fixtures at the start of the season aren't too bad. I quite like Chilwell, but Chilwell I wouldn't be bringing in for the first few fixtures. 'Cause I think when you get to about game week 7, game week 6, Chelsea's fixtures turn pretty dramatically. Got difficult fixtures in the first few, but then the change. So Chilwell from then on seems a great option. Cancelo, I'm still a bit funny about the rotation, but early on in the season, he's probably going to get a lot more minutes than he did later on in last season. But yeah, outside of them, I'd be sticking with that. So I'm going to skip down to the forwards because the forwards will dictate how much money we have to spend in the midfield. So kind of the good and the bad thing about the forwards this season is they're all literally within 1 million of each other. I feel like last season you could get a lot of 6 millions, and then there was kind of a gap up to the 8s, 9s, but there's a lot of people, more players, priced at like 7.5, which are really good options, but it doesn't allow. I don't think there's a lot of like 5.5, 6 million strikers that give you a great upside. So there's two strategies to take with a forward. You go all out with two and have just one player really cheap, might get a few minutes, similar to how we've had in the defence and midfield. But how I would structure it is because you've got these two cheap players here, then to have three playing strikers. So I think my number one pick, this is for the start of the season based on the fixtures. If you look at Villa's first three fixtures, you couldn't get much better than that, in my opinion. So Watkins, at least for the first three fixtures, is a dead set in my team. I actually had the next player we're going to talk about set in the team already, which I do. Everyone's going to have a slight doubt about Tony because they've just been promoted Brentford, but I don't. Even the Arsenal game for them, I feel like Tony could get some goals. Obviously, there's a lot of hype about him, scored so many goals in the Championship, but this set of first five fixtures aren't too bad. Like, obviously, that's a solid bad run of fixtures there, but for the start of the season, kind of like Watkins, I don't see huge upside from other options, but I do like the striking options. I think the striking position is one of the harder ones to pick because, like I said, there's a lot around the same price. So we've picked in these two. I would also note Calvert-Lewin, who has a decent run at the start of the season, should be pretty fully fit if he gets the pre-season in there because he didn't play a lot of minutes at the Euros. Callum Wilson's always one that I feel is hit and miss. You're never sure when he's going to fire, but he can fire, and is the main goal scorer for Newcastle when they're on form. I'm staying around that price bracket. We'll mention Kane because if Kane gets a transfer to Man City, then he's just a totally different. Well, he's a great asset at Tottenham, but if he's at City, I just think he just makes it an unreal asset. At the minute, there's a lot of debate about the transfer if it's going to happen, and he's not even training with Spurs at the minute. So I don't want to have Kane in my first team to start with. And interestingly, it's Man City against Spurs the first game week, which could be tasty depending on what happens with Kane. But I'm not going with Kane at this point in time. We also have to mention Bamford after how he played last season, but the first few fixtures for Leeds aren't really appealing, so I'm avoiding him to start with, and we might jump on that bandwagon later on. Vardy's a no for me this season. Firmino's always a no for me. Aubameyang, no. Werner, I feel like he could get a lot of assists in this season, but he's not someone I'm going to be going there in a hurry, that's for sure. So we drop back down to that price range. Richarlison for me is ruled out for now because he's been at the Olympics, and I think Brazil just got through to the final, so he's probably going to miss a bit of the start of the season because of fatigue and just needs a bit of a break. Another high up on my list is Antonio, mainly due to the fixtures, which are quite favourable. Obviously, there's two reds in there, but that run at the start is not too bad at all. Obviously, the doubt about Antonio, as usual, is his injuries, but he's a great option to have in there, which I think if I was looking at it now, that's a very solid lineup, but you've always got this risk around Antonio with his injuries. The thing when you're going outside of that is Iheanacho, you think, is he going to get the minutes? Obviously, he's got to compete with Vardy, and he's now got Daka, who they've recently signed. So I think if we're guaranteed to get Iheanacho as a starter, he would be in for Antonio straight away. but there's a slight doubt about his minutes. Probably needs to be monitored through pre-season. If there's an injury to like Vardy in pre-season, then I'd be straight on him because his fixtures aren't too bad. But at this point in time, I'm not jumping on him straight away. A lot of these options down here. An interesting one, if he gets a transfer, would be Abraham. He's a good price at 6.5, and you always know he can score goals. I've heard rumours of him maybe going to like a West Ham, which won't be a bad move for him. It'd probably reduce Antonio a bit as an asset, but it'll be a good one to have in there. I have to mention Cavani. I like the Cavani punt at the start of the season because Cavani, well, obviously coming from a United fans' point of view here, I can't see any way at the start of the season that he's not going to get a lot of game time. One of the main reasons because Martial is literally just back in training from his injury. I don't expect him to get a lot of minutes, probably the first 3 or 4 game weeks because he needs to get back to fitness. Rashford is having surgery, so he's not going to be playing. So realistically, you've only got Greenwood who could play striker instead of him, which obviously could happen. But the fact that at the start of the season you only play 1 game a week effectively, unless you've got like a League Cup tie, Cavani has got that rest to be able to play all those games. Cavani is a really good option for probably the first 5 game weeks. So he's an interesting one. Obviously, you're spending $1 million more, but that $1 million could be used, well, it could be very vital. It gives you a bit of a head start at the start of the season. And he's easily downgradable to one of these 7.5s, even 6.5 with Tony. So I really like that as an option. I'm not going to lie, because his fixtures start of the season, yeah, you can't really go wrong with some of them. Especially, like Leeds looks like a difficult fixture, but it can always go like last season. Was it 6-2? I think it ended up. So it's a very interesting one. I'm not sure I'll be pushing the button on him yet, but it's a very interesting problem to have. Just a side mention for Timo Pukki as well, who I think will be a great asset a bit further down the line. But I think Norwich's first 4 fixtures are ridiculously difficult. I think they've got like Liverpool's the first fixture. I think they've got Chelsea in there as well. So it's a lot of difficult fixtures in there. So as I said, I think you have to pick your forward line there, and then it gives you that. What do you want to do with your midfield here? So with 14 million, realistically, that's like 2 7 million midfielders, or you go for a cheap option and you go for a more expensive option. So let's have a look at a few that we could toy with here. So I've seen Zaha doing decent in pre-season, to be fair, so that's not a bad shout. I think I'd be straight on Barnes if he hadn't had that injury, because he was looking really good before his injury. But at this point in time, I'm not jumping on it. Rafinha, I've seen a lot of people with Rafinha in there. I think I mentioned Leeds fixtures. I'm not a great fan of these Leeds fixtures, the first 4. Like, 3 Reds and Burnley away is a difficult fixture. I think everyone kind of finds Burnley. Like, obviously, they can have their off day, Burnley, but it's always a physical game away to Burnley. So those first 4 fixtures, I'm not a Rafinha fan. Not going to lie about that. What if we're going for the cheap option, which is not the worst option to get around this? I think Smith Rowe gives you a great potential in there, but the only issue I have with that is, are you guaranteed to get a lot of points from these two to keep you going throughout the season? That's the hesitation that I have with picking that combination. But then that gives you 8.5 to have more money to spend on another midfielder, which you might find beneficial. So if we have a scroll through here, that's also brought another Arsenal. I didn't think I'd be discussing Arsenal assets as much on this video, but I do like the look of Pepe for the start of the season after how he played at the end of last season. I think they've got a decent, well, I probably wouldn't be picking him for the first 3 games, but Brentford's a decent one, and the next 2 fixtures after that aren't too bad. So let me just go up to like a 9.5 to just give you a bit of a, so you can see where it would. So if you wanted like a Mahrez in there, you'd only be half a million short. So you could easily go to like a Kufal or someone here. Even a Foden. I'm not a big fan of the City rotation. Like, obviously later down the line where you can take a few more risks, then that's a bit different. But at this point in time, I wouldn't be going there. I think a lot of people will be expecting Kai Havertz to do well this season. He's at 8.5, which isn't a bad price, but I don't think we've mentioned Chelsea's quite hard fixtures here. Well, we did actually mention it, I think, on Chilwell. So at game week 7, it changes quite dramatically. So I'm not. Havertz at that point is a very valuable asset. If you want it for a game week punt or even 2 game weeks, you might do well against Arsenal. I know scored against them the other day. He's not a bad punt to have. I'm not sure a lot of people will have him in there, but especially from game week 7, he's a great asset to have. I don't know why he wasn't coming up when I was filtering it. It's probably further down the points. Even if you can find somewhere to shoehorn Son in there, you're probably going to have to scrimp back on your defence a bit. Well, only 1.5 million, so that's not as bad as it could have been. Go for another 4 million defender, or save some more, even downgrade one of your strikers if you want to get Son in. Because realistically, if Kane gets sold, Son is going to play basically striker for Spurs with 2 wingers either side. So it just makes him an unreal option. So you could try and squeeze him in there. So there's not a huge amount of people. I think Son, if you want Havertz, even a Mahrez has been doing very well in pre-season as we just had him in. If you want to get a third premium in midfield, I'd be going for one of those, Son, Mahrez, or Havertz. But Havertz would be like a 1 or 2 week punt just to give you that bit of edge at the start of the season. Or as we mentioned, you go for 2 middle of the road kind of players. So I've seen a lot of people doing the Aston Villa double up with a new signing of theirs, Buendia, who we have down here as 6.5, which is a decent price for him, to be fair. I'd argue it's slightly high, say 6 would probably been about right. Because it puts him at the same as Rafinha, and I feel like Rafinha had a very good season last season, so that slightly. I think if he was 6, a lot of people would have him straight in the teams, but it's still a great option at 6.5. I think there's some interesting options around this price range. I do like a bit of Bowen because of the fixtures as well. And Bowen when obviously West Ham like to play, well, whatever formation West Ham have, they tend to have a striker and then 2 wingers. So Bowen, in my opinion, is their first choice winger, either side. It seems to be Fornals and Bowen who would normally start. So he's a good, probably the best West Ham option. So even doing that, 6.5 gives you 1 million to play with if you're looking at the fixtures in a few weeks' time. If you want to somehow downgrade one of your premium assets and get Kane in, when or if he goes to City or Spurs, that's a good way to get in there. There's quite a few interesting options around this price range. Like Mount later down the line could become a good option after the first few fixtures, or even for a 1 week or 2 week punt, kind of like Havertz. I mentioned Zaha has been looking decent in pre-season under the new manager Vieira. Gundogan, if he fires like last season, is going to be unreal as well. So I think this part of the pitch, the strikers, there's quite a lot of choice at that price range. These few midfield picks are probably going to be the ones that differentiate at the start. Even some of the defender picks, especially some of these 4 million picks. If these 4 million picks just take off, then you're in a great position. Even Maddison at the start of the season, 7 million is a good price for him if he meets his potential, and should have had a good rest over the summer, so hopefully he'll come back firing. And like I mentioned on Barnes, if Barnes didn't have that injury, I would have been straight onto him. And then Pepe, as we mentioned, that game week 4 onwards. I'm not sure you want to hold him through the Chelsea and the City fixtures, but later down the line is a good option as well. Oh, and also scrolling down there, Mason Greenwood, as we mentioned a bit earlier. So you could easily be doing Bowen and then putting Mason Greenwood in here. The double up on United double up in attack, should we say, isn't a bad way to go at the start of the season. As I mentioned when we talked about Cavani, Greenwood has a high chance of playing as well as Cavani, depending on how well Sancho integrates. Realistically, if we're going to play attacking, you would have probably Greenwood, Sancho, and Cavani. But Pogba can sometimes play in that front 4. Obviously, Bruno's always going to be in the middle, but Greenwood and Cavani at the start of the season, because of Rashford and Martial being out, have a great chance of getting a lot of minutes in there. So, as similar to with Cavani, like 4 to 6 weeks, easily great options to have in there. I thought that was Greenwood's ownership there at 40%. I was going to say that's really high. I can imagine he's probably over 3% Mason Greenwood. Oof. That I do like that as an option. I'm not gonna lie. I think he had him in a few weeks at the end of last season. But yeah, that kind of gives you a bit of a guide on the structure there, guys. Hope that's been helpful and gives you a bit of a way to work your team around. Obviously, you might not agree with my three essential picks that I built the team around, and if you get rid of one of these, it gives you a lot more funds elsewhere to easily get a Kane or someone else. But you have to let me know what you think of this kind of structure and how you guys are going with it. Let me know in the comments down below, and as I mentioned with the socials at the start, you can reach out to me on Twitter, in the comments on YouTube, or even on Twitch when we're live streaming. But for now, I hope that's given you a good guide, and we'll see you probably later in the week with some more content. And I appreciate you all, and we will see you on the next video. Have a good evening.